Okay, so today the purpose of this session is to cover how we manage custom web content related to your CIOC online resources database, so either your community information or your volunteer opportunities database. There are a few different kinds of custom content that we're going to talk about today. So what is custom web content for your database? The main thing I would guess most of you would think of is your design template files. So images, style sheets, JavaScript, ways to sort of put your own touch on the look of your CIOC site. That's obviously one of the major ways that you create custom media content for your CIOC database. It can also, though, include logos. We do have support for logo files, particularly for organization and program records, but you may also use them elsewhere in, they can be embedded in descriptions and kind of anywhere in any of the records in your database where you might want to have some kind of event or agency logo in a record in your database. A third kind of supplementary content is extra pages for your site. So information about your organization or service, an FAQ for your site, terms of use, privacy policies, inclusion policies, information about a specific site or portal, ways that people can extend your services or information about additional services you provide, information about licensing your information, and more and more and more. So pretty much an unlimited number of different kinds of pages that you might want to add to extend the basic database that you have, which lists organization records or volunteer opportunities. And the fourth kind of content is kind of an extension of all of these things. It's the idea of putting embeddable media into your site. So YouTube videos, Google calendars, Twitter feeds, slideshows, all kinds of content that you may be generating in another platform like your Facebooks, your Twitters, all of the various Google services, but you want to bring that content into your site. So the first thing I want to talk about is how template files got so complicated. So it used to be that we had a policy that everyone had to host all of their own logo files and all of the content for their CIOC site because we, for security reasons, do not allow anyone to have access to CIOC servers. That keeps everybody safe and their information secure and private. But when we moved to a mandatory SSL for CIOC.ca names and made it so that all logged in users and views needed to be in secure mode for your protection, it started to become a problem for people to be able to host files themselves. Most people aren't yet at the stage where their website is securely hosted, so they don't support SSL or HTTPS, and they therefore didn't have a good spot to put images or other supplementary files that they wanted to use on their site. And so in order to make sure that people were able to avoid something called a mixed content warning, which I believe almost everyone on this call will have had a discussion with me during the transition about what that means. When you visit a secure site, you will see a little lock in the browser bar generally, and that lock is only fully closed in green if all the content on your page is secure. And there are a couple of different levels of concern when some of the content on the page isn't secure. So generally speaking, if images aren't secure, most browsers, depending on their settings, will only have the most mild of little warning, like maybe the lock is not the completely closed green lock, but the page loads normally and most users won't notice much. But depending on the circumstances and the way things are configured, they may get a more alarming warning. And for things other than images, things like JavaScript files, that content may just be entirely blocked by the browser, and that can mean that the experience for the user is significantly diminished because their browser is trying to protect them from having secure information transported insecurely. So because a lot of people weren't able to host this extra information securely on their own websites, we did a transition where my company has been paying for some hosting to bring all of these existing logos and related files into a space to securely host them for you. The challenge with that is, if you've ever had to come to me with an update for your logo, you know that there's a limit to how prompt I can be about reviewing it and ensuring that it's sort of in a fit state to be posted, and there's a limit to how much we can post for each group, so you don't have free control over your content. So it's really not the ideal situation in the long term, but it's been doing a reasonable job of getting the majority of the users having all of the critical files that they need hosted securely. So what I want to do today is try and show you how you can switch to managing this content yourself very inexpensively so that you can have that full control over it. And I'm going to give you some advice about things you can do to keep your costs down and your download times down, and kind of do the same sort of reviewing that I would do if you were sending me your image file for posting, which those of you who've done so know I often come back and say, you know, do you have a better quality file? Do you have a different format? I might resize the file, and I'd like to make sure that you know what it is that I'm thinking when I make or do that review before I post it, so that you can also prepare your content in the same way. So if you have these supplementary content files and you need to host them securely, what are your options? The first option is, if you've got a website and you have a lot of content on that website, the best choice is to make your own website secure and then host your content on your existing website. This is absolutely the best thing you can do if you can afford it. So there is generally a cost involved if you decide to move to have a securely hosted website. You may need to buy a security certificate. You may need to pay a small extra fee to your hosting provider to manage that certificate for you and allow you to host securely. So it's not often free, but this is changing significantly from when we first started doing CIOC sites securely many years ago. The prices have come down significantly, and most of the providers now offer this as a service. It used to be almost impossible to get in a common hosting environment, and at this point it's assumed that many people want to be able to host securely, so it's getting much easier to change your website into a securely hosted site. I'll be posting this presentation up soon. It has a lot of links to things like lists of certificate authorities, and you'll see here I've linked to the Let's Encrypt project, which is an effort to have a certificate authority that can offer free signed certificates for use by everyone, to try and encourage everybody to host all of their content securely. Secure sites are better security for you as the owner of the site. It's better privacy for your users, and it also gives you a better ranking in Google. So any way you look at it, if you can afford it and are willing to make the effort, the absolute best choice is to get your website, if you have one, securely hosted. There's a question, one moment. Oh no, not seeing anything on the screen. Thanks, Tio. Okay, so I have the slides here, and they will all be available after the session. So I was talking about these two links. There's a link to certificate authorities and a link to the Let's Encrypt project if you want more information about those. But in general, you'll need to contact your hosting provider to find out what options they have available for you to know what you can do. So there's no one-size-fits-all. The hosting provider that you have will have policies about how secure certificates are managed and whether there's additional costs for adding this to your website. So it's not something I can tell you it will cost you this much money and you'll have to take X, Y, Z step. Different hosting providers are going to be different. So you need to talk to the person you're hosted with. And if your hosting provider doesn't offer secure hosting, it's maybe time to switch to a better one. Okay, if you do not have a website or your website is just, you can't arrange the secure hosting or you can't afford it or whatever the case may be, and it's just not a good option for you for whatever reason, or maybe you're running a portal for a third party and you want them to host their own files and you don't want to have to deal with them, there's lots of reasons why you might need a special place just to host these files. The good news is it's really easy and really inexpensive to do this. There are lots of options. Most of them are so inexpensive as to be almost free, and often are free to start. And there are some of them that are very easy to use. And I'm saying some of them are easy to use because some of them are not easy to use. So this is a case where you're going to want to find one that has SSL included as part of the basic service, that has a simple file management tool that you feel comfortable and confident using, that isn't difficult or doesn't require a lot of technical knowledge to use effectively. And you also want one that is responsive to your geographic area. So different providers are located geographically in different areas. They might have multiple different locations or endpoints where their services are offered, and you need to pick one that's going to be effective for your community. So there's no point in picking a cloud provider that is extremely fast if you live in San Francisco and tremendously slow if you live in Quebec and you're trying to serve people in Quebec. Well, then that's a terrible choice, or you might have to do something else like a content delivery network in front of it to make it fast for your users. So you do need to test whether the responsiveness of the hosting provider you're looking at is acceptable for your area. I do give a little bit of an estimate here about the cost. So I'm saying between $1 and $5 US a month, and often free to start. So depending on the service, you might get a 1 month, 3 months, or even a year of free service to a specific limit. Those free services are actually subsidized, meaning they have limits, and if you go over that limit, then you have to pay for the difference. However, for the purposes we're talking about, so a few files, like a few CSS or image files for your CIOC site is so small that on many of these services, you will never go over the free tier for the period that it's available. To give an indication, I'm still on the free tier for Amazon S3, where I'm hosting files for many of our CIOC users, and my monthly cost, although it's over the free tier, is still less than $3 a month US. So it's absolutely economical. So I'm going to take you through a couple of what I think are very, very easy to use for anyone cloud hosting providers. So there's a few more that I'm going to mention that are also very good services. They may be slightly more complex to access or slightly smaller, or something else that makes them not the one I'm going to show you today. But these two are tremendously easy to use. I'm using Amazon S3 now, as I mentioned, for hosting the content that I have for the CIOC members today. So let's bring up the console of both of these services. So each of these cloud providers often offer many different services. So what we're talking about today is file storage solutions. So they'll have their own funny names for what their particular storage solution is called. I've tried to include that in my listing. So in the case of Amazon, it's called S3. So once you sign up for an AWS Amazon Web Services account, you can create an S3 account and begin working in the console as I am now. For Google, it's the same thing. They have multiple different services, but you're looking for the Google Cloud Storage service specifically. Okay, so Amazon S3 and Google Cloud Storage. And in both cases, we're going to be creating something called a bucket in which our files will be held. Okay. Go to storage. And in S3, I'm already here in my list of buckets. So S3 is the storage system. In Google, you'll see I picked from here storage. That was the same as picking S3 from the Amazon one. So I'm now in the storage console for both of these things. And in both cases, I have a list of buckets. In this case, I've only got one bucket in my Google Cloud Platform. I've got quite a few here in my Amazon S3 account. Process of creating a new bucket is incredibly simple. The bucket name has to be unique across all buckets. So not just your buckets, but all buckets everywhere. So I can't create the same bucket name as someone from another company. And the way that they usually recommend dealing with this is to have the first part of your bucket names reflect something unique about yourself. So I have ones that start with CIOC or KCL. Over here, I created one that started with KCL. By picking some unique start of all of your bucket names, you can ensure that your bucket naming is going to be unique and you're not going to have a problem in comparison to anyone else who's using these hosting services. So you can have as many buckets as you want. It's sort of like a file system. So if you can think about these almost like little folders that hold similar content to allow you to organize it effectively. Within each of these buckets, you can put additional folders to organize it even further. And I'm not sure with Google, because I haven't done any of the billing stuff on this yet, but I know in Amazon's I can tag these items to be able to isolate them for billing and sort of subdivide it for reporting purposes. So let's create a new bucket today in each of these. The first thing you have to do for either of these services is pick an endpoint. So that's the where the servers that are going to host your files are going to be located. It's important to pick an endpoint that's going to be efficient for you. So I talked about this earlier, that for performance reasons you needed to know. There are some services out there that will allow you to test how fast an endpoint is for you. This is cloudping.info. I have it linked in the presentation. So I can see, for example, that of the 3 U.S. data centers for S3, that U.S. East is by far the fastest, and that's consistent every time I've ever run this. U.S. East is the one that is the fastest for me. So that tells me that if my clientele are here, that is the endpoint that I should be choosing to get the best performance. So I'm going to pick U.S. Standard here as my endpoint. Oh, and someone already took this name. Okay. Now that I have my bucket, I can click on my bucket name to go into it. And it's exactly the same process here in the Google bucket. Okay, so I can click to go into it. In my Amazon, it's completely empty. So I can easily add files using the upload tool. It's exactly the same for both the Google one and the Amazon one. So I can pick an image. In this case, I want this to be a public image. So you can see instead of starting the upload, I'm picking set details, which gives me the option to make everything public. Okay, I can add that later if I forget, so it's not a big problem. I can start upload. Okay, done. And the same would be for here. I already uploaded this one, but it's exactly the same process. Upload files. This one's even simpler. There's no extra stuff. And if I want to make this one public, I simply check off this share publicly link. Okay. Now, how do I actually access that file? So in the Amazon AWS window, I'm going to click on the name, make sure that I'm on the Properties tab, and it's going to give me a link to the file. I'm going to open another browser because this lets me test that the permissions are correct and public, and I can see I can access my file. Let's do the same thing with the Google one. So this one, there's actually a public link here. I'm going to copy the link. Again, I'm going to test it here to make sure that it's coming up nicely publicly, and it absolutely is. And that is it. That is the entirety of how you would do the storage. It's incredibly easy. You can change something to be non-public if you want to. In AWS, you're going to right-click, and there's the Make Public, okay? Or you can do the properties of it and permissions from here, okay? There's the ability to rename files, to move them to other buckets or to other folders, all from the action menu here. It's just like working in a normal file system, and really you need zero technical knowledge other than basic computer skills to be able to do this. So you don't have to have any web skills or anything like that to be able to manage these files. So there are many, many, many other services available. In most cases, if all you're doing is supplementary content for an online resources database, you won't need anything other than storage. If you have a problem with performance, or you need to get your content out to a very geographically diverse area, then you may want to consider a content delivery network, which I'll very briefly touch on. But most of you should not be getting into that level where that's a necessity, but it is available if you're having cost control issues or performance problems, and you need to bring those under control. A content delivery network is a way of caching and controlling the distribution of your files so that you can get better performance and a lower cost. Okay, so what about other providers? Three more that I know of well, and there are hundreds, but these are three more that I'm familiar with, are going to be Microsoft Azure Cloud Storage. One of the neat things about working with Azure, if you're so inclined, is you can actually get, there are ways to build it into Windows such that you can manage your content through Windows. I do find that it's a harder process to set up initially than what you just saw today with me on Amazon and the Google storage. So there's kind of a harder startup process, but once it is set up, the features are really excellent, so that is an option. DreamHost is another one that is quite economical. It's mainly known for its WordPress hosting, but they do other kinds of hosting and obviously do this sort of basic cloud storage. And Rackspace, I'm familiar with only in that I know people who work there, and I've chatted with them a lot, and I do know sort of some things about the business, but I've never used it, so I can't give any pluses or minuses. I do believe that there is an extra cost to doing SSL on Rackspace, but it is available as a service. So most of these providers do allow you at least a short free trial, and some of them it's really long, like Amazon's S3 is a year. So test drive them. You usually have to provide your credit card, but they will not charge you, and if you cancel before the free trial period is over, there's no charge to you. Unless you're doing something really outrageous, that's, you know, hosting enormous files that are being downloaded by millions of people, the cost should be tremendously low. As I indicated, my cost for managing all the files that I do for you right now is a few dollars a month. It's so low. So this should be a very economical solution for anyone who wants to get into hosting files themselves. One of the great things about the trial period is that it gives you a sense of what your costs will actually be. One of the challenges is most of these cloud providers provide calculators to let you see what the cost will be, but for the most part, you have no idea how many gigabytes of files you're going to store or what your bandwidth is. You don't know how to answer the questions that they're asking you until you actually try it out and see what your numbers look like. So don't be afraid to do a test drive of a few providers and see what they're estimating your cost will be in order to understand the impact of the service. Because the prices of most of these providers are similar enough and low enough, it usually makes more sense to pick something that you find easy to use and that has a really good response time, and not worry too much about, oh, this one is $1 more expensive than this other one. It's not worth worrying about if one is significantly easier to use over the other, or the files are served significantly faster to your area than the other. So I would encourage you to prioritize performance and ease of use over cost, because the cost overall should be so low anyway. If you do get to a point where there's a problem with the performance, the files are loading too slowly, and you've followed all the best practices I'm about to tell you, or it's getting to be really expensive, it may be time to consider a CDN. There are lots of very excellent CDN products out on the market, not just with the cloud providers I talked about, all of whom I believe have a CDN offering, but there are very large CDN specialist companies whose entire business is about developing an effective content delivery network. The content delivery network lets you control caching of your information, so how often things need to be fetched without checking to see if they've changed. And they distribute your information to many different endpoints, so many different geographic locations, different servers in different locations, which can really help with performance, especially if there's some distribution geographically of your users. So now we'll get into a little bit of best practices about how to make your files, format your files and store your files in a way that is going to keep your performance up and your costs down. So this is something you need to consider before you put your content up. And unfortunately, as bandwidth has gotten better, people have failed to continue to care about the size and formatting of their files. And this is the tragedy of the web, that when I first started in this business, we had to be meticulous about every image, everything on the page, because people had dial-up. And if you had huge file sizes, people would get so irritated with your site that they would leave, or it would cost them money because they were only allowed a limited amount of content before they had to pay more, or they ran out. And as people got high bandwidth, the developers of sites stopped caring about how big the files were, or how much had to be downloaded by the end user in order to use the site. Now that we've got in the mobile era, it matters again. It really matters. And 40% or more of your traffic is going to come from people on mobile devices. And that means it's important to start caring again how large these files are, because your end user is going to have a very bad experience on your site if they have to wait 20 or 30 seconds to download your content and use your site. So once again, we must begin to care about the size and formatting of the files that we use. It's not good enough to just take whatever your graphic designer hands you, post it on the web, and link to it. Yes, you may be able to scale down that file so that it looks good on the page, but I have seen sites where a tiny image was actually 2 megabytes when it could have been 1/1000th of that size. And you're causing unnecessary expense to your end user, especially if they're on a mobile device. They're paying potentially to download that unnecessarily. So don't just take whatever file you've got, upload it, and figure that's fine. Generally speaking, everything you post needs a review. On your CIOC sites especially, most of you have very high traffic, and so this impacts a lot of people, and you're going to pay for all of the bandwidth of people downloading all those files. Okay, so there's 3 major things you need to do to keep your web content in order. One is organizing your files. So every project should have its own bucket, for example. And if you have many files in the project, you should have subfolders or another way to organize the files, such as putting images in an image folder, CSS in a CSS folder, and so on, so that you can easily keep track of all of the files that you're putting in. If possible, you want to specially designate any content that is temporary and put it in a different place from the rest of your content, because otherwise you'll never remember to get rid of it later and you will just accumulate clutter. The next important thing if you use JavaScript or CSS files, such as in your design templates, is to use a process called minimizing. So there's a link in this presentation here to a great little resource of various minimized or minifying tools. Oh, trying to open in Firefox. That's actually on the Google blog. Within CIOC software itself, we do this minifying of our files. It basically cleans up all of the unnecessary comments and white space and extra things in your files to make those files as small as possible so that the person who's downloading it can get it as quickly as possible and with the least file size that can, without losing any of the content or changing the quality of the file in any way. So there's lots of tools, online tools, that will allow you just copy and paste your stuff in and then it spits it out. You don't edit your minified file, so the idea of minifying a file is you keep your master copy, the one that you edit, you minify your file, and that's the one you post. So whenever you need a change, you edit your master file, you run it through the minifier, and then you post your minified file for actual use on your site. And then finally, choosing an appropriate scale and format for your image files is going to have a huge impact on speed and quality of what the image looks like. So a little about scaling and formatting images. What you pick matters extremely. So choosing the wrong format for your file can be the difference between a professional looking site and a site that looks like it was made by someone in high school. So you need to make sure that you understand the kind of image that you are posting and choose a format that's appropriate for that image. So on the next slide, I'll give you some tips for how to choose. In terms of size of the image, you should make it as big as the maximum size that you want, understanding that as you change the size of the page, if you're using any kind of scaling of the images to the page where the image gets bigger and smaller depending on the screen size, that you need to figure out what your maximum size would be that you would need going both height and width, and make the image that size. So whatever the biggest size you would like, that's the size that the image should be scaled to. It should not be bigger than that because then you are making the image unnecessarily large. And it should not be smaller than that because then you're forcing people to have a scaled image that's going to look sort of gross and blurry. So always the maximum width and height that you're going to need for whatever size of display someone might be using. That is the size of your image that you need. Most graphics packages include an optimizer when you save the image that allows you to figure out a compression of the image that is balanced with quality of the file. So they'll often have a little sliding scale if you go to advanced settings when you save a compressible file like a JPEG, with a little slider that lets you compromise between a smaller file and a more crisp and clean file. And you need to decide, using those tools, how to compromise between the best quality and the best file size. And it's absolutely not true that you should always pick the smallest file size or always pick the best quality. In fact, neither of those is almost ever true. So usually the highest quality file size and a 20% less than highest quality, a human being can really not tell the difference between those two in many cases. And so you're just making them download more for nothing. So there are more than 4 types of images that you can use, but there are 4 major ones, and in fact really 3 major ones in use. The oldest 2 web formats are going to be GIF or GIF if you prefer, or JPEG. Newer but growing in importance and now quite significantly important is the PNG, the PNG, Portable Network Graphics. And then finally I'm going to talk a little bit about SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, what that is and when you might want to use something like that. Most people have never heard of that, but you can do some really cool stuff with SVG. So it's good to know what the possibilities are and when you might want to use a format like that. So what do you use when? JPEG is best for photographs or anything that has a lot of color blends, a lot of shades, lights and darks, something where the human brain really can't notice a lot of differences between a little bit of compression and a full quality image. So that's one of the formats that most often has that little slider I was talking about if you're saving the file in an image editing program, where it lets you choose how much compression to apply to the file. You do need to look at the results, because if you compress too much or you try and do it to an image that's not well suited, meaning something that doesn't have lots of colors and shades and isn't like a photograph, then it has lossiness. It looks, to me anyway, like someone poured water all over a photograph. Something's just not quite right with it. It's sort of blurry, but it's more wet. I would describe it like someone dripped water on your picture. And it is not high quality when that happens. So it's a fabulous choice for photographs. It was originally developed specifically for that purpose, but it is terrible for logos. There is almost never a case, ever, that a JPEG should be a logo. And when I get sent a logo in a JPEG, I generally ask for another copy. That's not a JPEG, because it's almost never a good choice. Most logos will have crisp lines and text, and a JPEG is going to blur that, and it will be noticeable to the end user and not look high quality. Next, the GIF, or GIF, if you prefer. Really great for simple graphics. If you have a logo with a small number of colors, that a lot of solid blocks, crisp text, lines, it's fabulous for that purpose. And the lower number of colors you have, the smaller your palette, the more GIF can compress that image and make a smaller and smaller file. And in some cases with very tiny palettes, like 2 colors or 3 colors, the size of the file is absolutely minuscule. So it's a fabulous choice for those cases where you just have really bright, clear lines and a very small number of colors with not a lot of blending or shading. Excellent choice for that. The other advantage that it has over JPEG is that you can do block transparency, where one color in the image can be see-through and let the background show through. Only one color. So they actually take one entry in the palette, in the list of colors, and say that anywhere that that color appears is going to be clear and show the background through. And of course, as anyone who's spent more than 2 seconds on the internet knows, you can also have animated GIFs, which is a feature not available in something like JPEG. So you do have that advantage of having a little bit of a movement element to your graphics if you choose to use an animated GIF, although it's, be careful. And finally, PNG, which is the newer player on the block, was created to take what a GIF can do and improve on it. So it does most of the things that GIF does, and it does them well, but it does have better support for things like photographs because it has a much more expanded palette, so you can have many more colors. You can do wonderful things with gradients, and in fact, you can do gradient transparency. So you can have a partial transparency where it might have a blue hue but still show the background through, or gradients of transparency where it's more transparent on one side and less on the other. These are things that are not possible in a GIF or a JPEG. So you can do some pretty amazing effects with a PNG that just are not possible with any other format. The one downside is it can be a little bit greedy on the file size. So it's important to only make your image as large as you need it, and to make sure that that is in fact the most effective format. So you can potentially try saving it in a GIF or in a PNG and see between the two whether you're getting equivalent quality and which has a better file size. And feel free to interrupt me at any time, by the way. So I'm going to do a very quick explanation of an SVG, and I'm going to use someone's CIOC site to demonstrate this. So an SVG is scalable vector graphics. The thing that is great about scalable vector graphics are they are truly scalable. So they are a description of shapes, lines, text. It's actually text. I'm going to show you what SVG looks like. This is, in this case, it's embedded SVG, meaning it's right in the page. Okay. So this crazy looking block that you just saw flash with all of these coordinates, this is what makes up the SVG image. It looks like XML. Pretty much is XML. It describes where all the points are in various shapes. It describes what color those things are. It allows you to do cool effects like have the shapes change when you put your mouse over them or interact with them. So you can do things like have them fade in and out, change color, change size, disappear, change the text. There's all kinds of really amazing things that you can do with an SVG that you just cannot do or cannot do easily with anything else. Because this is actual text, it does tend to be very compact, so it's very efficient for the end user to download. And of course, it has the fabulous advantage of being fully scalable, so no matter what size, it will grow and shrink to fill exactly the space that you want it to fill, as long as you set it up to do so. You can use SVGs and image tags, but you can also embed them right in your HTML without using an image tag at all. And then I can do things like have links. So each of these is linked to a search, for example. You can see it underlines the text when I put my mouse over, changes the border color and the background color. And this is really an unsophisticated use of the style tricks that are available. You can do very fascinating and very cool things. So it's great for supplementary content, that you want to be interactive so that the user can actually do things with the image or interact with it in some way. Not a fabulous choice for things like your logo, only because it does have slightly less support than some of the other formats. All the modern browsers support it that I have ever seen or used, but really old browsers may not support it. So it's best not to use it for critical things like your logo, but it can be great for extra content, and in particular for interactive content. It does often have a different set of tools from other formats. So if you have an older graphics package, you may be a little frustrated with the SVG support. There are free tools out there to create and work with SVGs, and you can generate SVGs from other kinds of images if you have a decent graphics package. So this map here, for example, was generated using another map that was a simple GIF map, and I used my graphics package to sample that and then create a new image that was compatible with SVG. So that's something that's sort of maybe not for your average user, but it is something you can make use of if you have a project that wants to do something like that. It is available as an option, and you don't have to host it anywhere because it can be just embedded into the content of your page. So it doesn't even require any hosting most of the time, although you can do it as a separate file that you host. So a little note about logo files, not for your template, but within records. So I have seen people try to take advantage of the fact that an organization already has a logo on their website, and they just directly link to the image location that that organization has posted. The problem with that is you then have zero control over content that you're displaying on your own site. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Unfortunately, mistakes are made with websites, things like forgetting to renew your domain name and having some porn company pick up your site. I've seen it happen too many times. It's just a dangerous thing to do when you don't have control over that content, and you may not even know that the file goes away or gets replaced with something else that's incompatible. So I strongly recommend against ever directly linking to content that is not under your control and having it display on your site. The exception, of course, is major media platforms like your Google Calendar, your Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. You in effect are hopefully controlling that content, and so that's okay. The issue is when another party has full control over the content and you choose to put it in your site and there's no accountability there. That's a risk that I don't think you should be taking, so I recommend against it. Now, in terms of sizing logos, the recommended maximum width of a logo file for displaying a record is going to be 350 pixels, and the recommended maximum height is 150 pixels. The file should be readable at the size you choose, so there's no point in making it the size of a penny and no one can tell what the logo is beyond maybe picking the colors out. That's not beneficial. At the same time, if you have a giant file, it looks terrible and it takes up a huge part of the page. So the best thing is to have standards for logo files. Get a copy of them from the originating organization and use an image editing program. There are many free ones available to resize the file and scale it to be less than 350 pixels wide and preferably less than 150 pixels high. That will give you the best visual effect on your record, and you can a bit play it by ear based on the logo design. So before I get into custom pages, does anyone have any questions about custom files or any questions I can answer about the content I've covered so far. Okay, if you think of something, just type your question in. So now I'm going to talk about a new feature, which is custom pages in the online resources software. So the idea of custom pages is an ability for you to create supplemental content that's not a record in your database, but just an absolutely custom page in your database that will support the rest of the content in your database. So pages are created either in the CIC space or the volunteer space, and the reason they're separate is that they will be branded with whatever the template is for community information or volunteer. So you could obviously link to a page from CIC, or that is CIC from volunteer and vice versa, but the menuing and design of that page is going to be whichever module you pick to build it under. So I'll choose right now to build a CIC page, so that means it's going to have a CIC template. I'll create a brand new one. So a slug, what is a slug? The idea of a slug, and if you have a site like WordPress, you'll be familiar with this already. This is the part of the URL, the web address, that will tell us to load this particular page. So the format of custom pages is going to be the address of your CIOC site /pages, or in the case of volunteer, it'll be volunteer pages, and then your slug, whatever that may be. So I'm going to call this my new test page. Give it a title. And then we have an HTML editing tool. So the idea of this tool is you can create content without knowing any HTML. Has the same shortcut keys that you will know and love from whatever your editing tool is. And this is where I would go, copy my public link, put my image in my page, I can do links, I can do, an anchor is a link within the same page, I can change all the formatting, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so it works just like you would use any kind of word processing tool. The next step is I have to pick a view that this is going to show up in. So it could be a staff-only page that was just content that you needed to give to staff. Maybe you create an emergency services page that has direct link to records that are used in an emergency. Maybe you have a particular emergency that's going on at that moment, and instead of creating a whole new view or other way to manage it, someone comes in and creates an information page in the software, links to important records for that, whatever purpose you want to use it for staff. And obviously for public, it may be things like information about your organization, the services you provide, information about a special project that you're working on, really whatever you like. As soon as you've added the page, you'll be able to view it in that view, so only that view. So if someone tried to access this page from another view, they would get a not found error. So here's the page that I just created. I've launched it in that view so that I can have a look at it. And we can see it looks just like it did when I was editing it. And it has now all of the CIOC header and footer so that it fits in with the rest of the site. If you want to do really complicated HTML, there is a tool source code option that lets you directly edit the HTML. And that means if you do have someone with web developer skills, you can do advanced features, including taking advantage of many of the special tools that are built into CIOC for formatting. So for example, this particular page is using something called a bootstrap accordion, which basically allows you to create a menu like this and have it pop open and show content only when you want to look at that content. So this is a custom page that's been built using that page builder tool, but it was done using actual HTML source because it's added all of these sort of more fancy HTML things that you can't do automatically through the page editing. It was done by editing an HTML page in an HTML editor and then copying it into the source code. So you're not confined to just the tools that are available from this WYSIWYG editor. You can actually view source and edit it like any HTML page. There's currently no limit to the number of pages you can create, but depending on how popular this becomes, we may start tracking usage of pages similarly to the way we track usage of records, so that it kind of is wrapped into the overall usage of the site. Right now it's not tracked, but I can see in the future that we would add the usage of the custom pages like we do to how we track the usage of records. Is there any questions about custom pages or how they work? It is worth mentioning that custom pages are not going to be searchable through the front page. So if you're creating content that you need people to be able to search for with a keyword search, for example, you have to create it as a record. This is really intended to be supplementary content. It can't replace database records, especially because it's not searchable. It will obviously be searchable through Google because Google will find the pages and index them, but it's not searchable within the CIOC database because it's not a record. So in terms of ideas for what you can do with it, just to expand out on what I've already mentioned, some of the things you could do would be, let's say you wanted to have a step-through search, which is, we don't have anything quite like that. You could build something where these were all questions, and if the question applies to them, like, or I need help finding housing, and you click it open, and it gives you a little blurb of information about housing help, and then it might link to some searches or specific records. And then I have another one, I need help with food, and I open it, and it gives a little blurb about finding food in the area, and then it might link to various searches or records. There's really no limit to what you can use this for because it's completely custom. So you can build whatever you want in it. Okay, and finally, a little note about embeddable media. So generally when I'm talking about embeddable media, I'm talking about widgets. All the major platform providers, YouTube, Twitter, Google, all of those things provide widgets for taking content from these platforms and putting them into another website. So generally it's copy and paste. You find the place on the site that will generate you a widget. You might be able to configure how wide it is or what color it is or other things about the appearance. You'll copy and paste the little HTML snippet that you've got into your custom page or your header, your footer, your record description, any of those things, and it will automatically display that content and make it available, usually running the media right in the page for the end user. So yes, you can put YouTube videos on your main page introducing people to your site, or within a record, or put your Twitter feed on your main page, or any of those things. So, and it's usually just a matter of copy and paste. As an example of a few of those, So here's an example of the Twitter feed that's been put on the main page of the site. Another example. Let's see if I can remember. Oh, trying to guess URLs here. Hey, so here's an example of a Google Calendar embed. So this has been put into one of the tabs on the search. In this case, it's a food portal, so it's got a calendar of all of the local free and low-cost meals, which I think is a fabulous idea. So again, from Google Calendar, they will actually give you the HTML that you just copy and paste into, in this case, it's a view setting. This is the search center message, and there it will appear as a new tab with your calendar available. And that can also be embedded in a custom page that you create for your site, or even within a record in your CIOC database. And the same is true for many, many different media platforms that they have widgets available for you to copy and paste and sort of put wherever you need. Now, just like with other kinds of media like images, any external content has to be secure in order to avoid having mixed content warnings and get the lovely green lock that we see up here. So all of the major service platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Google's, they are all SSL all the time. So you will have no problem with that. If you're using a more obscure provider, you might have to seek out the secure version, but certainly any major media company is going to provide you automatically with a secure version of that code. Okay, that's all the content I have for today. Hopefully that was useful. There's a drop-in on the 15th of July. So if you start playing with this and you have questions, that's a perfect time to come and ask me for assistance or get some advice, or if you need a bit of tweaking. If you would like assistance moving over the files that I'm hosting for you, all you got to do is ask. I'll provide you with a zip of everything I'm hosting for you, and make sure that you know how to update all of your existing links to go to the new location. You don't have to do that. And in general, I would actually recommend that you just focus on any new content, and I'm happy to continue to host anything that I've already got up for you. Okay, if there's no questions, that's all for today. Thanks for coming, and I hope to see some of you on the 15th for a Q&A. Thank you.